African Real Estate webinar. This is our 6th webinar in our COVID-19 Impact on African Real Estate series. Last week we focused on the workplace and the future of the workplace, and that provided a great segue for this week's discussion as we touched on how technology might impact the office sector as well as building and facilities management. So this week we'll be taking a deep dive or deeper look into the Proptech scene in Africa and how COVID-19 will potentially fast-track its adoption across the continent. We've got quite a well-diversified panel representing East, West, and Southern Africa, so we're looking forward to the discussion. Obviously, Proptech has taken on a more prominent role in discussions globally, and I think that the momentum will only carry on into Africa as we go in the next couple of months, years, etc. So I'd now like to welcome our speakers for the session. Moderating and setting the scene for the discussion is Sean Godoy, who's the co-founder of Proptech Africa. And our panelists for today are Roland Igbanoba, founder of Nigeria Proptech Association, Jessica Davies, Senior Disruption Analyst at Nedbank, Jevons Otinyo, founder Proptech Kenya, and Luke Edo, who's the Managing Director of Fulmore Realty. Thank you all for giving up your time today and for providing your insights. I would also like to give a big thank you to our headline sponsor, Standard Bank, and to our series sponsor, Nedbank, for allowing these sessions and the series to happen. For the audience, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session, and we'll try cover as many as we can within the hour and a half that we're running this program. We'll also be running polls where we encourage the audience once again to contribute, and we will share both the video as well as the results to these polls in the webinar recap. I'd now like to hand over to Sean, who will start off with a brief introduction and then a deep dive into the panel discussion. So thank you, and we look forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Kafir, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thanks for taking the time out. I'm hoping we're going to have an interesting discussion, and like Kafir said, look at a more deep dive into the sort of impacts on adoption of PropTech, and also where it can actually assist people face the different challenges and requirements that are coming up, and sort of try to look at that from a more practical perspective. So yeah, just before we introduce the panelists, just to set the scene a bit. So obviously on a global scale, the case for PropTech has become increasingly stronger as various opportunities, results and successes, coupled with increasing investment, encourage wider adoption or at least interest from real estate stakeholders. So a key comment that I've heard and I've repeated a few times is it's no longer a question of whether to consider and adopt technology, but instead how to go about this process and understand the offerings and players in the field. So we've seen a lot of content around PropTech. I'm sure you have seen with your work and with the sort of news sources and conference events organizers have seen the sort of the prevalence of PropTech entering this conversation. So it's become a real thing. Instead of talking at a wider sort of scale, it's like how do we actually do this? And of course, seeing people realizing it's part of the actual industry. It's not an outlier or something that's sort of a threat or a sort of completely new way of doing things. Often a lot of integration. So again, globally, there's an increasing number of PropTech services and products that are having meaningful impacts and resulting in realistic results. And this is both from within the real estate sector and also from outside sectors and players. In comparison, PropTech ecosystems in the African real estate markets may still be maturing, but there's still a promising level of activity and adoption evident in a variety of these markets that indicates a positive PropTech trajectory for the continent. From innovative new PropTech companies making an impact to traditional stakeholders taking meaningful steps to innovate, and the emergence of PropTech associations to connect the sector, raise awareness, and grow PropTech as a whole. We are seeing markets that are open to new ways of doing the business of real estate, which is ultimately what PropTech offers to the industry. Against this backdrop, our discussion today will center around the impacts of COVID-19 and how this will influence the adoption of PropTech on the continent. as well as unpack practical insights for real estate stakeholders as they look to enter a new way of doing things due to the pandemic and the many impacts it has. So let's dive in, and I'd just like to welcome our panelists and ask you to turn on your video and audio, please. Don't be shy. Lakman, thank you very much. Let's see how we go. So starting on the left, we have Lakman Edru, who is Managing Director of Filmo Realty in Nigeria, based in Lagos. We then have Jessica Davies, who is Senior Disruption Analyst at Nedbank. Then Jevons Otuneo, who is founder of Proptech Kenya, currently in Mombasa. And then Roland Igbanoba, who is founder of the Nigerian Proptech Association. He will be joining us shortly, I believe. He was just having a technical issue just before we started. But I'm sure he'll be with us shortly. So thank you very much for being here, panelists. And if anything, we've given you a reason to scrub up for the camera, I suppose, which is something we don't often have to do these days. But yeah, thank you very much. And I look forward to a great discussion. So just to kick us off, I'd just like to ask you each for a short opening comments, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So at a high level, do you believe COVID-19 will be a catalyst for technology adoption in real estate? And this is around considering stakeholders who perhaps had existing plans for innovation and those who did not. So if Lakman, if you'd please open up for us.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having me, and excuse my COVID lockdown look. I haven't had a haircut for about 6 weeks. So yeah, it's been interesting. I think that all of us here know that obviously real estate has been one of the slowest industries to adopt tech. And obviously it's capital intensive. There's, especially in Africa, there's a culture in how we do things. There's an issue about safety and trust. With how capital extensive it is, how much people are willing to do online is a thing. And at the same time, the capital intensity in real estate, what it has done is sort of separated the markets where real estate is mostly driven by an older generation that drives technology. So we have that two distinct industries, and technology obviously driven more by millennials. They will also have the characteristics of wanting to be more asset light than the older generation that have this culture of wanting to own as much assets as possible. So anyway, so I was looking at some studies, and I saw KPMG said about 86% of real estate companies want to adopt PropTech and technology, but then only like 24% of them have a clear strategy. So down to your question, I think there's 3 different sectors of PropTech. There's obviously the collaborative economy, there's the smart RE, and then there's also the real estate fintech section. So for the collaborative economy, I think yes. I think a lot of us are realizing that we can do a lot more with less. Where I'm realizing in my business that I don't need so much space, that I can work with people working at home. I don't need to be as asset heavy and own as much assets as I currently do, or manage as much assets as real estate assets as I currently do. I mean, obviously we're talking about houses, rooms in houses, offices, restaurants, storage spaces, car parking. I'm guessing a lot of people are realizing that they don't need that much space. And if you remember, the shared economy first boomed in the 2008 financial crisis. And obviously we're in almost the same kind of situation now, where economies are struggling, and they need what's it called? And obviously there's now more tech. There's now more understanding of tech since 2008. So I think that we're going to see a larger impact when it comes to the collaborative economy than we did in 2008. So I think that is obviously everyone has excessive space. We're talking about government buildings, libraries, schools, banks. Some banks are already talking to me about managing their spaces better, and universities, even churches might be looking to commercialize their assets and create more and optimize their real estate. I was reading in the news yesterday that a headmistress in Lagos, in Oyo State, I think a state in Nigeria, that she's been leasing out the school premises to block molders in this COVID lockdown. So there's already some of that activity happening, given that there's no tech. On the smart real estate section, I'm not too sure how that's going to be impacted. So I hope some of my colleagues would have more information on that. And in the fintech side, I think likely no. Why I say that is because obviously real estate is our is most people's biggest investment, and I think especially in Africa, there's still this belief that it's too risky to do transactions online, to be able to trade, hold, or trade, hold, or keep value on or keep the value online. There's obviously a lot of trust involved in that. In Nigeria, we call it 419. So having to be able to transact or do things online is it's a very iffy thing. So if anything, people might be able, now that the economy is tighter, people might be more safety cautious in doing transactions online and stuff like that. But again, obviously, the real estate transaction side, the fintech side is very highly inefficient with 3 to 6% transaction fee. So any technology can save money there is whatever. But then on the final note, anyone that reads history and philosophy and stuff like that will talk about the black swan, where the things that we can't predict are the things that make the biggest impact to our lives. So it's a question. I mean, look at it, how internet has affected us. 9/11 has affected us in the US. It questions us to think how much we can predict stuff and how much we can rely on analysts and stuff to tell us what's going to happen. That's my 2 cents on the question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lachlan. I think that's great opening remarks there. And yeah, you've touched on the various parts of the value chain, which is something we're going to unpack during the discussion, because obviously the impacts are different depending what part of the value chain you're looking at. And as you say, the pandemic is an example of a big event that is likely to change things and have lasting impacts. So it's important to start unpacking that and thinking about it. But yeah, thank you very much. And Jessica, if you'd like to share your comments. Oh, Jessica, your microphone is off. Oh, we still, yeah. I don't know if you just make sure your audio is on. Oh yeah, we still can't hear you. Let me jump to Jevons, but then we'll come back to you. Okay. Jevons, if you don't mind sharing your comments, please.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So to answer your question, what I can say is that I think Proptech will actually accelerate, and that I'm speaking in much of in a general terms. I like the way my brother Lukman has actually dissected it with the different sectors, and now you see how fintech is now will actually not accelerate, and the other sectors, the collaborative economy will actually accelerate. But then, if I speak with reference to Kenya, I think right now, before COVID, there has been a reluctant nature of people to actually start to adopt technology. But right now, I think people are clearly seeing the importance of how to adopt a digital strategy within their companies. It's like the fourth industrial revolution is actually coming into their eyes. They're actually getting the picture that there is need to adopt these technological innovations, you see. And also, during this COVID-19 in Kenya, I think, I don't know if you've heard, there is Google Loans. There was a approval that was done on Google Balloon Loans, where there's a partnership between telecoms, the mobile service provider, and Google Loans. Now we see with that, there is a sense of internet connectivity being enhanced, and that has been brought about just from COVID-19. So we feel
Okay.
I see Roland's joining us. Roland, if you could just mute your audio for a second, please. Sorry, Jevons, go ahead.
Okay. No worries. So with that, we see how an infrastructure is being set for technology to thrive, and with that, I think it's in a way creating a ecosystem for people to now start adopting these technologies. So I believe it will accelerate, and that I'm speaking in general terms, because right now we are now starting to put an important consideration in this topic. And now actually companies are now trying to see how they can reinvent themselves. They're now trying to see how they can rethink in digital terms, you see. So that's what I can say in my comments for now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. It's a great comment. I think there's a lot of new partnerships and initiatives that are coming from both private sector and public sector, where it could actually open up or be a sort of a boost for the Proptech industry and for adoption, and also lead to a lot of new opportunities, I think, for people who might have not thought of entering the sector. So thank you very much for that. Jessica, if we can go back to you. I think your audio, I think, has dropped. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we'll sort that out. Maybe speak to Gideon. Let's go to Roland. Thank you and welcome. Roland, are you with us?
I can hear you, yeah.
Great, thanks. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thanks very much. We were just doing opening comments, so just at a high level in a few minutes, just asking everyone to give their input basically on, do you believe that COVID-19 will be a catalyst for technology adoption in real estate on the African continent? And this is considering stakeholders who perhaps had existing plans for innovation and those who did not.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. And I think what COVID-19 has done really is try to create, I wouldn't call it a new normal, but I would say, especially for the continent, what has happened is more than ever before, now we understand what role technology should play or can be playing across all sectors, not just property. Now, when you bring it into property, it means that more than ever before, we must come to a point where we need to seriously consider our infrastructure in the continent. Okay, infrastructure, I'm talking about technology infrastructure, data infrastructure, because that's what all of this needs to run on. And so, yes, I agree to answer the questions that COVID-19 has opened a whole lot of opportunities, especially in the continent. You know, we see things as simple as having virtual meetings. It's popping up everywhere in Africa. Okay, you see banks, financial institutions, you see governments doing virtual meetings. And so this is a great awakening, really. And I think it's going to flow into real estate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roland. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Obviously, something like this, like Luckman touched on, big challenges or like on a global scale, obviously highlights perhaps risks that are obviously part and parcel of that, but also opportunities. I think it sheds a different light on things. And then, highlights, once you have to do these things quickly, it highlights the shortcomings of the infrastructure that you actually need to adopt these things. So those are fantastic points. Jessica, thanks a lot. It looks like we can hear you. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, so I certainly think that if we just look back in South Africa, maybe specifically over the last 5 weeks, we've been asked to stay at home under quite severe restrictions. And this has been happening globally. And so the question is, what happens to business when you can no longer move around and engage with your stakeholders? And for businesses that were lucky enough to be able to move their operations online, work remotely, make use of virtual meetings, and the like, they were able to continue doing business. But essentially the construction and real estate industry, rolled to a standstill. And while I think technology has been on the roadmap of a number of property companies across the value chain, technology has been seen as something maybe to look to in the future. And I think COVID-19 has really accelerated the need to understand how this affects your business now. And we're seeing it at the bank. Like Roland was saying, we've had to move to remote operations. We've certainly seen our digital channels have massive spikes in usage just because of the need to use them, without us having done more than we need to. And retail has been seeing it as well with the move to online shopping and delivery. And these are capabilities that they'd thought about and built, but haven't necessarily understood what would happen if they were all switched on at the same time. So I certainly think it's going to change the way we think about different technology and how we use it in our everyday lives.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Those are very relative points there. I think we're all finding new ways of doing things. And these days, sort of a new approach obviously includes technology most of the time. And like we've been touching on, I think it highlights opportunities, but also shortcomings and the challenges. And that's where I suppose people need to get innovative and come up with new ideas quickly, which is where I think long-lasting change could actually come to the sector, which is great. So thank you very much for those comments. I think I was going to ask Luckman and Jevons if you could just quickly highlight some of the key challenges you think. We've picked up on a few here, but if you could maybe highlight the 3 top challenges you think are sort of hindering real estate stakeholders in Africa from adopting Proptech specifically. If we could start with you, Luckman.
Sorry, just to be clear, you're asking me what are the three main what again?
The 3 main challenges or barriers basically for real estate stakeholders in Africa for adopting Proptech, focusing on like a practical sense.
All right, adopting Proptech. So I think that I touched on that in my opening remarks, where I talked about the transactions side of Proptech and people having the ability to transact. So either what's it called? Either buy property, do valuations of property and stuff like that online. I think the biggest challenge is trust. As I said, real estate is very capital investment. It's people's biggest investment in their portfolio. So the trust to be able to do those kind of transactions online and the safety of doing those transactions online with all the internet fraud and stuff like that really creates a barrier in people doing that. And as I said, I also mentioned before that I think that as the millennials in the market tend to grow and take a bigger economic proportion of the economic activities. So as they grow up, I think obviously they're more, we are more adaptable to trusting tech than our fathers and people as old as you. I'm sure.
Thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, so I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. But honestly, as I said, except for the collaborative economy, obviously people already have long leases, especially in Africa. It's very unusual to find short lease agreements. So people are already tied down to long lease agreements. And obviously, most of them are going to have to write that out or suffer penalties if they try to come out of those kind of things. So I think that there is going to be a pressure. Also, I think there's going to be more dire concerns on the issue of liquidity and landlords' liquidity in this pressing time. The ability for tenants to pay. I think those are the more pressing issues that are gonna come out from these things. Obviously, hospitality and retail are going to have the biggest impact when it comes to what's going to happen in COVID. And offices, I think, and again, when it talks to the development of real estate, we all know there's almost a 2-year lag between whatever happens to the economy and how fast it impacts real estate. So we're now talking about the development side of real estate, that it takes 2 years to build a new building. And obviously, so the question is, how fast would the actual effect of COVID change the real estate space? Because most things are already in construction and stuff like that. So I think that there's quite a lot quite a lot of factors to consider in that question. But But things that I think are obviously going to be affected are things like how we value our assets, what the valuation of the assets, obviously, and all of these things are done very manually in Africa. So those are my 2 cents. If that's answers.
Fantastic. No, fantastic. Thank you. I think you've highlighted obviously the fact. I think there's immediate challenges, like you said, securing income and retaining tenants, and obviously rental collection. So there's these sort of immediate cash flow effects that need to be handled. So obviously, it'll be very much a case of what takes priority.
And exactly, and maybe, and actually, just to add into there, maybe obviously there are some PropTech companies now where in Africa generally it's 1 year or 2 year leases, but we're seeing PropTech companies like Rent Small and Muster and Fiverr in the Nigerian space, where it creates the ability for tenants to pay on a monthly basis rather than an annual basis. So basically taking on that risk exposure for the landlord on the PropTech side. So yes, I think that there is going to be a bigger demand on that side. For 2 different reasons. Obviously, from the demand side, people's cash flow is lower. Ability to pay monthly is going to be more and more of an importance. So I think that there is going to be impact there. And on the supply side, which is developers, I don't think they're going to have much choice. So I think that they are going to have to be considering those kind of structures and partnership with PropTech companies to be able to sustain the cash flow they need to run their properties.
Definitely. Thank you. I think I was just thinking as you were saying that, it's great points. Obviously our solutions that'll offer immediate help, I think, to tackle the challenges around cash flow, and there's also building management, which we're going to come to shortly. These are the things obviously that'll need obviously landlords and asset managers, I think, will be looking for quick solutions, which is a key point. And then just briefly, Jevons, if you'd like to highlight any key barriers, obviously within the general African context or with COVID, that stand out to you.
When you speak about barriers, there are 2 things that come to mind. I think the first one that is really crucial is our culture. The thing is, with real estate professional, like our industry in general, we tend to have a culture of being conservative. So I think that's one thing and with that culture, it kind of hinders people to try to be innovative, So people are kind of contented with the already system that has already been tried and tested. They don't want to dive outside, to think out of the box and actually incorporate such technologies. Then another thing that comes into mind, we look at the nature of our industry. Most of the data that's collected is in traditional format, like paper format. You get, and the thing is, PropTech cannot thrive if data that's supposed to be used is not in the right format. You see, real estate is more of a data-driven industry, right? The quality of data is what will guide us as professionals to make more informed decisions, and so that we can shape the industry in the right way. So our culture is first thing, the culture of caution, conservativeness, and in which my brother here, Lukman, said where the older professionals are the ones who are having this kind of culture. But us as millennials and the Generation Z who are coming up, I think we'll see a kind of shift from it, because we have grown up with technology by our side. So we tend to be innovative in a way, and we I think that. And also to add on to that is I think another barrier is a skills gap, in which I think COVID-19 is kind of eliminating this barrier. Because before COVID-19, there was tendency in people not seeing the actual benefit of incorporating a digital strategy into their operation. But now I see with COVID-19, in a way, it's actually becoming clear how technology can become part and parcel of our industry. We do not need to not incorporate such things. And I think, those are my 2 cents.
Fantastic, great points. Thank you, Jevons. Just to summarize, I think it's good to have an idea of the key challenges, because these are things some people might be dealing with and might have to think about going into the future if they really want to do things. So there's overarching things like Jevons, you said, with culture and skills and also costs, I think, that are always there. And then there's specific things obviously driven by COVID, which is, I think, mainly a lot of times is time constraints as well. And then, as Lachman touched on, there's the micro stuff of actually like dealing with tenants who aren't able to pay and coming up with creative solutions for that. And there'll be a crossover. Some of it is, sort of traditional, obviously, property management and tenant management, but where could, technology possibly help with that, with creative solutions for space or tenancies, etc., collaborative approaches, and obviously linked to the shared economy. So I think there's some good points there and things for people to consider. I'd like to now move on to perhaps looking at a bit more focused areas within the real estate industry. So just like to start with Jessica and Roland. Lachman touched on fintech and sort of the part it plays. Whether or not fintech has an immediate need. I believe in cash flow management, etc. From my perspective, I think there could be some interesting interventions, and perhaps even with credit facilities aimed specifically at tenants, etc. But basically, I just wanted to ask you on your view of where sort of Proptech, fintech has a part to play in the current crisis, because it is, I think, financially that's an immediate issue a lot of landlords and tenants are facing. And in terms of general comments, and also if there's specific sort of interventions or products you're familiar with. Jessica, if you'd like to start us off on that, please.
Yeah, sure. I think the interesting thing about PropTech and FinTech is that they're actually very closely joined due to the transactional nature of property. So I certainly see there is a need to look at how we, as FinTech or the financial community, can start to ease the burden on society in terms of the stress that everyone's undergoing at the moment. So, I mean, we've seen a number of relief packages coming out from government, coming out from stimulus, coming out of stimulus packages that have specifically targeted, kind of some of the overheads of businesses, whether it be on the lending side or on the deposit side. And even the banks in the UK and across Europe have started investigating, mortgage suspensions and things like that. So I think, those are short-term measures that are applied at a macro level. But the opportunity for fintech is how can we change the way that we transact with property? And whether that's through savings, installments, relief, online transactions versus, the cumbersome paperwork, this ties into how we even register our properties and how that's being done. I'd be fascinated to look at the statistics in terms of what effect COVID has had on, land registrations. I know that there've been severe restrictions on tenants, moving into properties or moving around properties. And where we've gone from an old system where there was a lot of kind of trust and paper-based and type contracts, how can we go into a more online efficient way of contracting where we can handle these variable situations? So something Nedbank is working on is our API marketplace. So that's exposing some of our products like payments, escrow, home loans, etc., into other companies and platforms. And I think what that does is it gives companies a lot more flexibility, because PropTech companies aren't finance experts necessarily. And they don't want to build finance and they don't want to lend balance sheets and stuff like that. So how can we expose our balance sheet and services into the world or platforms that are changing the way people do things in the property sector? So I definitely think that's something to consider. Fantastic.
Thank you very much. A lot of challenges, but obviously solutions there as well, and big need for creative thinking, I think. So thank you. Roland, if you'd like to add your comments, please.
Okay, great. Now, I think the issue for fintech, will take me back to the question that Devans and Lukman spoke about, which is regulation. Now, I'll just say, what is Proptech? Okay, Proptech is basically technology, use of technology across the value chain for real estate. And this is where regulation plays a major role. I think CAF and CAHF has done a lot of work on the value chain for property, okay? And if you look through that value chain, right from access to land, okay, through the financing, the building, and up until the maintenance of the property, you will find out that there, at each point of that value chain, technology could be applied. But interestingly, governments, national governments across the continent do not have regulations that would favor the emergence of Proptech. I'll give you a typical example. 3 years ago, we were on a roadshow for Nigerians in diaspora to raise crowdfunding. Down the line, we couldn't progress because there was no crowdfunding regulation in Nigeria. But thankfully enough, there is an exposure draft right now that came out sometime earlier this year or late last year by the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria, an exposure draft for crowdfunding, okay? So regulation provides a key determinant. Jessica talked about in other clients where you find government giving interest waiver on mortgages or deferred payment on mortgages. Again, let me come back to my country, Nigeria, over 200 million people, huge opportunities for real estate. In Nigeria, we do not know how many people, the government, even if they had money and they wanted to do relief, we do not know how many people are tenants. We do not know how many people are landlords. Okay? And all of this boils down on regulation on the infrastructure, the data infrastructure that I spoke about. The reason fintech, coming back to the question, the reason fintech has succeeded in a lot of the African countries is because there's some tight regulations around how the financial sector operates. And that's what we must do, you know, across the different countries. Government needs to step into regulations. And if they don't understand how to regulate Proptech, what government should be doing is create a sandbox through which different Proptech solutions can be piloted until the laws are put in place. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the talent pool. Okay, that is another major challenge. We do not yet have the talent pool for property technology. So just trying to get a portal for a Proptech solution developed can take you anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Lukman knows this, you know, in Nigeria, where you have guys who start to do development in another, 2 months, your project is abandoned, they move on to another, doing another software engineering program and all of that, which is part of the reason he has created Prop Lab Africa. So the talent pool is very critical to be able to take Proptech to the next level. And so that would be my point in terms of the relationship between fintech and Proptech. Fintech is highly developed across many countries, okay? And when you talk fintech, you're talking about the payment platforms, you're talking about USSD, you're talking about all kinds of using financial technology. And I think that there's no problem in that area because once you have a Proptech solution, you can actually connect to the fintech platforms, to provide solutions for you. But I think the critical challenge for us is to deal with the issues of regulation and talent pool in the market. And that's why I think government also has a huge role to play.
Definitely. Thank you, Ronaldo. You highlight some key sort of overarching challenges as well for Proptech, sort of infrastructure related issues such as regulation being a big one, especially with anything fintech related within the property industry. Something obviously of interest to a lot of people is crowdfunding within the real estate industry, and we've had a question about that, which we don't have time to bring up right now, but just your question obviously touched on it, and there definitely is a scope in the African context, but the regulation really needs to be there to make it viable, obviously to protect both parties and to make it sustainable. And linked to that, which was another question, is the question of inclusion in real estate markets in terms of investment and property ownership. Crowdfunding also has a part to play there, and along with the tokenization of real estate, is quite interesting. So that's a whole another discussion, I think, which would probably be another webinar on those types of implications. But I just wanted to mention that there is definitely, I think, opportunity in Africa and a need for inclusionary approaches to investment in real estate and for ownership and increasing affordable housing and a number of important topics. So that's something just to bear in mind. Moving on to the next stage of our discussion, I just wanted to move into practical implications, looking at building management and property management specifically, which is one of the more immediate challenges, I think, that tenants and landlords obviously are having in terms of adapting their buildings and thinking about increased hygiene requirements and also occupancy and usage. You've got occupancy limitations for space, etc., and the amounts of people and social distancing in physical spaces. Obviously, this is a key issue and something that people are dealing with. So just to start off, in terms of return to work is something that's started happening and has happened in a few places after having a quite strict lockdown. So related to this, I'd just like to direct at Jevons and Luckman. What kind of specific Proptech interventions do you expect to see in office environments that aim to effectively facilitate new requirements and challenges related to health and hygiene and other considerations like I touched on? Jevons, if you'd like to start us off there.
Well, I think, first of all, when we are now coming back, when it's during this post-COVID, when now people are coming back to the office, I think one of the measures that companies will be taking is ensuring social distance. And how best can we ensure social distancing within our office spaces using technology? I think there is where now the design bit will now come into play, where now companies will now be trying to think to restructure their office setting in such a way that to limit the closeness of the employees. And also, I've seen some other places where guys are including contact tracing apps, where now you can actually locate where you can locate how employees how they came into contact. You get, so that's one. And also, I think another bit is in terms of now companies will be looking, especially for commercial buildings, how to set up systems that will be encouraging less contact. Like, for example, automating the doors. The doors, especially from all the areas for entry and exit. We'll be now working with motion sensors, where right now there'll be much less use of contact. This is one way to reduce spread of any disease or anything. Because one thing I believe, COVID-19 has brought an emphasis on health matters. Right now, hygiene is becoming critical to each and everyone. And if workspace are not tuned into such manner, I don't think they will provide such a conducive environment for people to work towards. So in terms of speaking on in the use of tech, I think all tech implications that will be included will be spanning around to reduce social distancing and also less of contacts between the workers within. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Jevons. Yeah, those are two key points, I think, and anybody with products or services, obviously, to offer landlords, I think they'd find a good opportunity, and there's a real necessity. So thank you. Luckman, if you'd like to add your comments, please.
Yeah, sure. So I was just keeping an eye on the poll running, and I see South Africa is winning in the poll. As long as we beat Ghana, I'm fine. I'm fine with Nigeria being.
Oh my God.
very
Oh,
Am I- so yeah, so fine, South Africa and Kenya just go ahead, but then my Nigerian brothers keep on hitting. We can't let go. So yeah, so my brother from Kenya, my new thing I thought would the main thing that I thought would be impacted would be less touch points, things like automated doors, automated sinks in the toilets, soap dishes. These are the kind of things that I feel will be the biggest when it comes to any form of technology. Again, as I said, I think I mentioned before, there is a lag period between when development is conceptualized and when a development is actually gets into the market space. So I don't think there's going to be that much impact into the actual infrastructure and the actual structure of a development from COVID, and it'll be more into the management of. It'll be more impactful on the management of existing real estate. Obviously, we know the market's going to be hit. It's going to be a significant hit. So we don't expect many new developments to be coming out anytime soon. People will be more concerned about trying to complete the already complete current developments already started as what's it called, as at low cost as possible. So I think that so I don't think that there's going to be so much difference in adding anything more into developments that are currently in the construction to be able to do that, because obviously right now the economy, we already know, is going to be very tight when we get back into the market. So again, automated doors and stuff like that. And I just wanted to think about, and I was thinking about it. I saw the question earlier on, and obviously, just to put what's it called, emphasis on the slow pace of real estate. Look at how fast Lagos, Nigeria, and Africa has been able to adopt the whole green building pattern and transition that we're seeing around the world, where more buildings are trying to go green. These were other social challenges that real estate had more time to what's it called, to adopt into, and we've already seen very slow adaptation of trying to get your buildings green and stuff. So I don't see any reason why this new social impact or environmental impact is going to cause that much difference to our current development plans. As I said, I hope I made sense there. That with the green buildings and with the natural environment issues, we're not seeing that much impact in real estate as in other industries. So I don't see why. I don't see any reasons or any patterns in how we're going to see a difference in the lag period and in the slow pace real estate development will adapt to be that. But again, my brother touched on that yes, social distancing. I think what's also going to play a part to that is that we're going to realize that more people are going to work from home. So there is going to be more space in offices. So hopefully there'll be more space management abilities for companies to be able to keep more space between people. And I think that more importantly, I'm already thinking about that in my company, where all my developers, I'm thinking, you guys worked great at home. Why are you coming into the office? So already I have free office space in my building. So yes, as what Jevon said, I think where we're going to see the most impact is things like places that people need to touch. We might see things like sensors for. I mean, if we talk about IoT sensors, now sensors are the cost of sensors are getting lower. So the real geeky guys might want to put in heat sensors and temperature sensors to be able to monitor people's temperatures as they're coming into their buildings. Yes, I suspect people like banks and people that might have cash flow might be able to go into that. But apart from that, I'm not sure where else I would see any more changes to the current plan and development.
Fantastic, thank you. I think it's just to pick up on your comments. I think it's very much there's obviously some conditions and infrastructure that is just not able to change quickly.
Yeah.
So obviously some things will very much remain the same, and it's the more sort of fluid parts of how we interact with real estate that are the issue. So just staying with this, Roland and Jessica, I just wanted to ask. Obviously, a lot of the points Jevons and Lachman touched on apply to real estate as a whole, but I just wanted to ask if there's any specific interventions or considerations for retail, residential, and also hospitality property that you foresee in terms of trends, or where technology can actually help people adapt quicker and help landlords adapt quicker? Roland, if you want to start us off with that, please.
Okay, great. I'll tell you. So to look at hospitality, really, the bulk of hospitality, really, especially for the luxury category, comes from travel business, right? And I think that the aviation is a sector that's really hit with COVID-19. So what's going to happen with occupancy ratios in hotel? Okay, for retail spaces, I would say it's with the adoption of social distancing, right? We will still go to shopping malls. There'll still be retail, will still be sort of stabilized, if not, I'm not expecting the kind of decline that would be evident in the hospitality sector to happen in the retail spaces. And like Jevons and Luke might have said, once we can deploy all of the Internet of Things, okay, then I think that would then help. Now, looking at traveling, for example, which also then impacts on hospitality, I see a situation where you're going to have people drive more, okay, rather than fly, or rather than jump onto trains. So what I see really is that for countries in the continent, and it takes me back to both government and the private sector, for countries in the continent, right? I think this pandemic has opened opportunity for some sort of nationalism, if you ask me. Okay, what are the local solutions that we can provide for what we are doing? And so if you look at the Airbnb, hospitality for Airbnb, am I going to book an Airbnb where I'm not sure of the social distancing or the infectious scenarios in that property? The answer is no. So for a lot of, and what has happened before COVID-19 is that the sharing economy, we were all talking about sharing economy was a major thing. We're talking about sharing. And that's a big hit right now with COVID-19. Okay, so if I'm riding on an Uber, what measures do I need to take? Same thing for Airbnb, for hospitality, for hotels, same thing happens. Again, like I said, with the aviation industry, that's a big hit. But for retail, I think that if the social distancing measures are taken into consideration, using all of the Internet of Things, which is sensors and temperature reading and all of that, retail could still could manage somewhat like a V curve, post-pandemic, right? But hospitality, I think that's some U curve right there. It's going to take a while before it starts to go up again. Retail, I think, can go up, immediately. Residential, I think, that's being the big safety measure, okay? And I think that's going to immediately come back in terms of having also a V curve. So those are my take in terms of those three sectors.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roland. Jessica, is there any specific comments you'd like to add for us?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely agree with Roland in terms of hospitality will become more localized. So we'll start looking local first, because in fact our thoughts about travel and our assumptions for travel are changing. And the need really for why we go overseas and why we want to go overseas, we've had to question this over the past few months. In the retail sector, it's an interesting phenomenon where stores are turning into distribution centers as opposed to shopping centers. And they're investing in online retail and pick and collect type capabilities. And so how are shopping malls today, in the way that they're structured, going to accommodate those needs in the future? At the same time, I think, we're going to see a rush of people going to the movies when they're allowed to, just for the novelty of it. So entertainment, I think, and the fact that going out and meeting people is going to become fairly important after these social distancing measures are relaxed. What I did want to touch on is Luchman's comment, in terms of real estate development. And I have a slightly different opinion there. Because while I agree with him in terms of costs, in terms of development are always top of mind, I do think there's scope for technology. It's just that the business case for why you're using the technology has to be incredibly well thought out in order to justify it. I've already said that our assumptions of why we travel are changing. So let's take the example of Nedbank as a funder of African properties. And what happens when we can't travel to the developments that we've invested in and or funded? So is there not scope for technology to be used in terms of monitoring and inspecting sites and the like, and giving stakeholders around the world, whether it's your funders, your owners, your future tenants and landlords, giving them access to view the site remotely and share information? We're also investigating how do we contract remotely. So we've got projects going on in Nigeria now where we're working with companies like CISO Global, and how do we contract with these guys so that business doesn't just stop and the like. So those are my comments.
Fantastic, thank you. I think developments, there's a sort of, again, immediate challenges that need to be addressed. And I think there's a lot that could be done with virtual reality and augmented reality in that sense. A lot of technology that's been available already and perhaps hasn't been adopted for cost issues or just sort of practical implementation. So I think that's quite an interesting one. I just wanted to ask Roland, Jessica just touched on the developments, physical developments on sites, etc., and the sort of the role of Proptech that it could have there. I just want to ask if you have any specific comments on that as well, in terms of how Proptech could help us sort of keep developments going and move things along in terms of actual on-sites and also contracts, which Jessica highlighted.
Sure. Now, again, it comes back to the data infrastructure in the continent. So, for example, can I order building materials online and they bring it to site for me? Okay. When I mean online, I'm talking about localized building materials. Even if these were imported items, is there a major building mart where, with all of the social distancing issues, right, and health and safety issues, I can actually do ordering online, and I'll expect that it will be delivered to the site, whether they're iron rods, whether they're cement, whether they're even aggregate mix at the right quantity. And these are areas where I believe strongly that the continent needs to begin to look at opportunity in terms of making the development go on, right? In medicine, we're talking about robotics in health, right? Talking about robotics, non-invasive surgeries and all of that. These are technologies that are being deployed in health and medicine. Now, in real estate, we need to do a lot more. And the only way to do this is to help our data infrastructure. So, I mean, there was an interview that was published yesterday that I did with one of the major newspapers in Nigeria, where I was actually speaking about manufacturing building materials locally, but how in this era post-COVID, we need to have a lot of building materials marked online where trust is guaranteed, quality is guaranteed, okay, and that would help to make developments going. Again, these developments may be developments at maybe residential or retail. It may not be at the luxury end, but I think a larger portion of the market needs to see a situation where this is happening. In Nigeria, you have a couple of builders mart. I think you have in South Africa as well, but my point is, how massive are these? Okay, these have the propensity to be some sort of an Amazon, or some other big, or Alibaba, where you can actually focus on construction material. So that would be my take in terms of property technology and what the opportunities that it presents. Remember, like I've said, with the pandemic, you're going to hear a lot of the pitch that you're hearing from the US, America first. Countries are going to look at themselves first, if you know what I mean. So, and that's what Africa must begin to think about, okay? How do we begin to provide local solutions? Because this is not a time where people are going to be allowing you into their countries, you know, and all of that. This is not a time where you are going to see a lot of inflows, a lot of foreign flows into the country, because people are wary in terms of investment. I think to also help, what government must do across the continent is to spend, and spend. Okay, that's the only way the economies, you know, can come back. Because the situations that we find ourselves with post-COVID, I don't think it's a financial problem. I think it's more about a real economic problem. So it is, how do we deal with the real economies rather than the financial sector? And this is where I think that things like building materials and the cottage industries, all of those associated along the property or real estate value chain needs to be looked at. And like I mentioned, right, CAF has done a good job on the value chain for property, and I think it's something that our participants should go look for and begin to think across that value chain. Where can I bring in technology?
We can't hear you, Sean. Your microphone.
Sorry,
Roland,
guys. My mistake.
I was just waiting for Roland to tell us that he was going to run for president of Nigeria at the end of that speech.
It's going to happen. Yeah, we will still stay friendly with Roland.
That was how this was going to end, Roland. You're just going to announce your candidacy for president of Nigeria.
Watch this space. Yeah. Sorry about that. I was just saying, Roland, thanks very much for your comments. I like the idea of e-commerce for construction materials and other things related to developments. I think that could be an interesting area for sort of streamlining the process and to keep things going in the current state that we're in. Obviously, sites might have some elements that are, or suppliers and materials that are considered essential and others that are not. So there might be, ways to be constructive around that. And I'm also a firm believer in local solutions for local problems. So the countries in the region as a whole, looking inwards and seeing how you can find your own solutions for your own specific issues, and also I think to support each other. The ecosystem is quite important. Just to remain with the practical implications, Luckman and Jevons just had a question covering which Roland's mentioned a few times, the value chain. There's a few specific areas where I just wanted to get your insights on how we could leverage Proptech to make things like marketing, building inspections, valuations, contract execution, which Jessica touched on, payments and conveyancing happen electronically in Africa. So coming back to the fintech, but these are just some specific areas I think where solutions could happen. So Luckman, if you'd like to start us off on that, on those key areas, do you see Proptech being able to help us take those electronically?
Okay, so I'm very wary of time, so I'm going to try and keep this quite as short as possible.
Thank you.
So I think that in the Proptech ecosystem, where we see the most activity, even before COVID, was in the agency business. All the website coming up, putting up properties for sale or for lease, and all of that. In Nigeria, we have companies like Zama that are going further than that, where obviously they're going into Google tagging. They're helping with the trust by doing some level of inspection and checking of who the real owners of these properties are. So sort of chopping middleman and doing some of the things they can do to give more trust to be able to work online. I know that they are working with more VR. Jessica touched on that, and I agree with her, where people that own assets can justify the investment in going into things like virtual reality and stuff like that for inspections and stuff like that. So we see like that. But an interesting company that is doing a lot of work in that area is a company called Estate Intel in Nigeria, where they just launched their bot system on Twitter, where you could ask questions on like cost prices of land, and get immediate answers and stuff like that. Obviously, because and that's on the back end of that is the AI and data analysis happening, that to help with valuations. So obviously things like land valuations and stuff like that are going to be able to happen more online. Obviously, property's a little bit more complicated when we're talking about buildings, due to all the other factors that influence the value of properties. So I think that we'll see more on the marketing, which is already a growing trend, and think more on the valuations. People like, as I said, people like Estate Intel working with AI and data intelligence are going to be more hopefully we'll see more demand on their side. So I think I'll just stop there and let Jessica add anything more to that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luckman. I just want to swing that to Jevons, actually.
Sorry, Jevons, sorry.
Not a problem. If you'd have some comments. Jevons, just so Proptech, how can we bring certain things more digital in terms of marketing, site inspections, valuations, contracts, payments, conveyancing? If you just have some comments there.
Well, now for marketing, I think the most obvious one is just the use of virtual tours, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality. That's the one technology that's really will really impact the marketing side. And speaking in relation to Kenya, I think most of our agencies have tried to shift from their traditional way of marketing, because right now we are seeing most agencies now adopting virtual tours, which for me is a plus, and at least we can see how a positive direction the Proptech scene is actually going. Because right now, if you are starting incorporating virtual tours, I'm sure in few years to come we'll be seeing 360 tours actually. See, so with marketing, the no-brainer one is just the use of virtual tours, which we're seeing agencies incorporating. For site inspection, let me speak in relation to construction, in which I believe drone technology will be the ideal and the best way and the best technology to actually help in the site inspection. But then we see there's a lot of barriers to use of drone. Like in Kenya, before COVID, there had been really strict regulations to use drones. There's a high, what is it called, fee, like a permit to use drone, which has actually hindered a lot of people from actually exploring the use of drones. We've seen one company in Kenya who have actually, they did one project in construction, but then after that they just left because they did not see a demand and a need for it, because we get most of our professionals are actually still in their conservative culture. They still do not believe that, hey, you can actually inspect your construction project with where you are. They do not need to go on site. But then I think with COVID-19, we're just hoping and praying the government will actually will ease in the regulations, and actually we start seeing the use of drones, because like what my brother Roland said about data infrastructure, we need some sort of legislation and regulation. It's the same thing with drone technology. They need to ease it in such a way that can encourage the ecosystem to use that. And in terms of valuation, just like what Lukman has said, AI is the best one, because AI is making use of data, so that we can make a much informed decision. You can make a focus on future prices or the prices that you're actually valuing. But then you get when I see it in terms of when I look at it in respect to my country, Kenya, the one big problem is data is not available in the format that it is needed. You get, and just like Roland said concerning the data infrastructure, we need to set data infrastructure. In which one thing I can commend about our government, we have the sudden activity on digitizing our data. I think that will go in a long run to help coming up with algorithms to actually aid the research sector and the valuation sector. So for valuation is AI, but then one major problem is the data infrastructure. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jevons. There's got some key points here. I think regulation touches on a lot of things. Obviously, if change needs to happen quickly, it's perhaps the industry's there and it's technology can scale quickly, but obviously the regulatory environment needs to accommodate that. So we have been seeing that move quickly in a few ways, obviously in the last few months with all the challenges governments have had. But obviously we'll see if that filters down into assisting industry specifically like real estate. And then your comments on data, something I wholeheartedly agree with, and something that's been touched on a few times in our discussion, and brings us to our next question, which I'd like to direct to Jessica and Roland. Data, digitization, analytics, and blockchain all have the power to alleviate Africa's chronic issues of lack of transparency and ineffective land administrations. So what practical solutions are we seeing implemented in this space across Africa? And how long will it take for the industry and governments to adopt these new technologies? So we've touched on a few of these things. Obviously, the regulatory environment plays a part, but it'd be great to get your insights there, Jessica. If you'd start us off, please.
Yeah, so if you're talking about land registration, what I'd love to talk about first is Rwanda as a use case. So what's incredible about Rwanda is, for those familiar with the Ease of Doing Business Index, they are number 3 in the world when it comes to registering properties. And the next closest African country is Mauritius, which is 23rd in the world. And then you've got to go all the way down to 81 and 82, where you find Morocco and Botswana. So the fact that Rwanda, the little country that does, is sitting near the top of that list is a really incredible story. And I'd advise anyone here who's interested to go read up about it. But essentially, they delivered a nationwide digital-based land registry system. It's directly connected to the main banks. And the project was one of the first of its kind in Africa, and is a great example of how governments can use open source software and open data infrastructure to change the land registry, really transform how land registration is done in a country. And this is so many follow-on benefits in terms of access to credit, improved income security, rural development, and growth for the country. So I think in terms of the continent, they really are a standout case in terms of what you can achieve when you do a mass data digitization and get your policy and regulation aligned behind that. And yeah, land registration often brings up the topic of blockchain. And what's interesting is we are seeing companies around Africa looking at blockchain solutions. You got CISO Global and House Africa, who are running pilot programs in Nigeria, in South Africa, to help solve some of those issues that Lukman and Jevons mentioned around transparency, trust, and the like, where in a lot of African countries, it's just not there in terms of land and ownership. But it will take time to get this right. I mean, especially in the blockchain space, we can look at other industries as to how long it's taken for this technology to mature. I mean, it's still not, fintech was quoted as one of the wide use cases, and banks around the world still haven't wrapped their heads around how this technology works. So it's still going to take some time. And when it comes to land registration, it's a complex environment with which to operate. You got multi-agency, multi-government, many stakeholders, local considerations. But when the World Bank did a review of land reform projects that they've been invested in over 14 of the past 20 years, what they found is that the ones that worked were the ones that took into account local context. And I think it's so important that we have local entrepreneurs and leaders building, solutions for Africa. We're not gonna find the solution by copying and pasting. We really have to tap into what's happening in our own backyard.
100%.
If I just to add, I like what Jevin said, and just to add to what you said, you're right that every country have their own different peculiarities, and obviously, where our challenges are like the corruption in Nigeria and the high cost of doing land transactions makes the need for poorer countries to adopt this kind of technology faster than some of the other developed countries we see around the world. So I just wanted to add that in there, that yes, and then it takes the government interest, that lack of interest from the government, because obviously putting these things in place takes away a lot of the control from governments, and a lot of governments just don't have the interest needed to be able to push this forward. So I just wanted to what's it called, to double down on what Jessica said. I totally agree with what you talked about.
Thank you, Lachman and Jessica. There's a lot of obviously scope, I think, to allow African property markets to leapfrog, where perhaps we don't have the established infrastructure in terms of deed registries. That is really an exciting area, and it does take time, but there's definitely evidence of interesting activity. And Jessica, I really like to highlight your points about linked to what Roland said earlier about local solutions for local problems, and that means supporting local entrepreneurs that may scale to become sort of regional players across the continent and maybe internationally. So we do need to support development of specifically Proptechs, I think, and provide things like sandboxes, which Roland touched on. I think this is an area that we'll see more growth in. I think more Proptech-focused accelerators and initiatives like PropLab, which Lachman and his team have been putting together with Filmo Realty. So it's great to see that activity. I think we'll see a lot more of that as well, and hopefully something like that in South Africa and Kenya soon as well. We sort of rounding up. We'll be closing up in around 10 minutes or so. But Roland, I'd just like to get your comments on what we just discussed in terms of data digitalization, analytics, and blockchain technology. Maybe just briefly in a few minutes, some opportunities and challenges you see from your perspective.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting that Jessica knows about they're working with Sexo Global and House Africa, okay? What I don't know is whether either of Sexo Global and House Africa have been exposed, whether the government in Nigeria, I don't know which of the government that they're working with, which of the subnational governments they're working with, whether they have exposed them to their registries. My guess would be no, they haven't. So if you cannot connect an API to a subnational government to the registry, I don't know how blockchain technology would work. You can do it in a pilot stage, okay? Just maybe a few sales, maybe under a property listing platform, but blockchain is about trust, right? Again, and that's where my point of subnational government taking property technology seriously. Today, we see a lot of, for example, Nigeria is in contemplation of several borrowings, right? The challenge is you borrow now, you solve the problem now, but you're going to leave the money that you have borrowed for future generations, okay? Is there a way to forget about foreign borrowings that future generation will pay off and then look inward? I.e., if you digitize the land registry, if you allow people like Sexo Global and House of Africa to develop APIs that connect to your registry such that you can earn in every transaction. 70% of the land transactions in Nigeria are under the table because of fees. So again, my point goes down to, House of Africa and Sexo Global can pilot blockchain on very minuscule levels, but what the government in each of the states or that they are working with, the government needs to be open-minded and open them up to their registry. That way, rather than looking for either borrowings or grants from the center, you can generate revenue just by having a robust blockchain technology. So that's my take in terms of land registration and blockchain technology.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roland. It also links to one of our questions, which asked if will there be a more urgent push for the democratization of data and what role Proptech would play. So I think this speaks exactly to what we've said. Deed registries and land administration is a wealth, sort of a wealth of knowledge and data that if made available and opened up, obviously through the right channels and the right processes, there's a huge amount of data for opportunity. I mean, from obviously increasing the speed of transactions and also opening up transparency and a whole new level of analytics. If that data was digitized correctly and obviously managed correctly, obviously speaking to opportunities of big data. So I think that'll be something we'll see, and we are seeing already, which is fantastic. But again, there's, I think, private sector, public sector, there's a lot of coordination and interaction to happen there, which is possible, if not maybe always a little bit challenging at times. So I'm just going to come to some questions that we've had from our audience. So just coming back to construction, which we touched on in terms of development, we had a question to the panel. So whether you think that the construction industry is open and ready for more standardized fintech platforms, or will we see an influx of various platforms that could possibly clash with each other? So I guess construction has a lot of physical and cultural sort of characteristics that could affect this. But I'd like to put that to you in terms of the construction industry. Are they ready for more standardized fintechs approach? Perhaps I could put that to you, Lachman, to offer a few comments, please. I think your microphone's off, Lachman.
Sorry, the question was if the construction industry will be more open to more fintech solutions.
That's correct. Yeah.
So when they say so I'm going to categorize the shared economy stuff because that sort of falls into the fintech space too. So yes, I do think that there is an opportunity for sharing. As he said, I think Roland talked about that a little bit about the assets needed for construction, and to be able to share this to create platforms where rather than people buy, because I am aware that a lot of times people have to buy equipment, buy PPE equipment, buy a lot of equipment that do add up. That creating platforms where some of these things could be shared or rented online, obviously create more peer-to-peer ratings, which is one of the things driving the idea of trust and reliability. Is rather than allowing individuals or the clients say the quality of their goods, actually see what peer-to-peers are saying about vendors and suppliers and quality of things. So yes, when it comes to the value chain or the process of construction, there's a lot of things that come into place. There's a talk about the PPEs. They talk about the of creating platforms where you can see different costs of cement and stuff like that. There's so many different. There's a lot of machines needed. A lot of times, because of quality, a lot of development companies end up buying these things and taking ownership of these things just for the reliability. And obviously, there's a lot of time demand or time pressure when it comes to construction. A lot of companies tend to buy these things and own these things. But yes, I think there is a gap there available for almost a shared economy and being able to transact and do things and be able to lend things rather than own things, which Jevon's talked about, where our generation, the millennial, we're very, very asset-light. We don't really want to own anything, where generations before us feel as if it's part of the asset base to have ownership, and it builds on the asset base to own a lot of these things that are not necessarily needed to develop. So I don't know if I've touched enough, but I think there's some space there that will be that does need to be. I challenge people. I mean, I'm not willing to go in that. People to create solutions to be able to to be able to address that aspect of the market, because there will be a bigger demand for that.
If I may, Sean,
Sure.
the second part of that question is, will we see an influx of various platforms that could possibly clash with each other? And this is a question of kind of cyclical effects. So because this has been a traditionally non-open industry to technology, and we're starting to see the interest in technology, this increases demand for solutions. And with the increased demand, I think we're going to see lots of new entrants into the space. We're going to see lots of platforms targeting different niches of the construction industry. And so there's going to be lots of competition coming up in this space, I would say. And then what you see will happen post that is you'll get a number of high growth type platforms, and thereafter you'll get into a phase of standardization and consolidation. But as this area becomes more attractive, I think you will get many different players looking to own this space. But it's going to be quite competitive as this opens up.
Definitely. No, thank you both, Luckman and Jessica, for those comments. I think construction is a very interesting one, especially I think it's become increasingly under pressure from the environments, economies, and cost sensitivity. So I think there is a drive for efficiencies, and there's a lot of sort of new approaches that perhaps weren't part of the past that we're going to see, I think, in the not too distant future. So yeah, like Luckman said, I think it's a challenge to industry and entrepreneurs to embrace this and see what we can come up with.
And peer-to-peer ratings of vendors and suppliers and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it happens in all other industries. It makes sense.
Yes.
So to be able to share information more between construction companies, I think will be a good place to start when it comes to
Definitely, it's a big cultural change, but the changes and the opportunities could be massive. And yeah, I've seen apps like that actually coming up where it's for construction contractors and suppliers, basically for peer-to-peer reviews, etc., which is quite exciting. Yes, but on that point, I think we're coming to the end of our session. So just some quick points, I think, on my end. I think we've had a nice broad discussion today, so I thank you all. And I thank you for the questions from our attendees. I think we, in terms of a quick summary, I think we covered nicely like the sort of the key fundamental challenges and also which create opportunities as well for Proptech on the content in terms of infrastructure, mostly on the digital side, where Proptech has a chance to offer obviously leapfrogging opportunities, skills, investment, and regulation, obviously key principles that obviously consistently need to be furthered and broadened from the various stakeholders from private and public sector. And I think practically, obviously COVID-19, it sort of the conditions and the challenges it creates on one hand creates a push to adapt technology and new ways of doing things in a quicker way, but obviously it's creating significant challenges in our economies that present a different set of challenges. But there's definitely a role that Proptech can play, especially in the way we use and interact, I think, with our spaces and our buildings, workplaces and our homes, etc. Interesting opportunities for retail as well. So thank you for your very valuable contributions today. And it's been great to have West, East, and Southern Africa represented. This makes me very happy. It's very much a Afro-optimist, so it's great to see this kind of collaboration, and I think it's something we should encourage more. And just to come on a point, I think we should definitely look to encourage our Proptech entrepreneurs, whatever sort of opportunity we get, and also challenge industry and governments to step in on that. There's a lot to be done. So yeah, with that, I hope all our attendees enjoyed the discussion. It's been a pleasure moderating, and I thank you all again. And I guess if anything, at least we've launched a presidential campaign in the last hour.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to add one more thing in there. I don't think we touched about IoT sensors. Obviously, with technology coming out now, the cost of sensors to plug into things is drastically lower. That total BMS systems cost $250,000. Obviously, you know much about what I do, where I focus on management and integrating with IoT sensors. And I'm saying and I think there's a lot of energy savings and cost savings that can come with plugging in with IoT sensors to be able to make buildings more affordable when it comes to the running of properties and stuff like that. So, yeah,
Key point. Thank you, Luqman. Yes, definitely worth highlighting. And
there's a huge market consensus. Yeah,
huge, definitely. And in terms of property facilities management, a lot of opportunity, and that's something that will change quite quickly, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Great. So Kafir, I'll hand over to you, and thank you to everyone again, and to API and the sponsors from my side as well.
Yeah, so thank you, Sean. It was a great session, very insightful, and thank you to our panel, Luqman, Roland, Jevin, and Jessica. Thank you so much for participating. And yeah, I think there were some key points taken in. I think we'll probably unpack them as we go in terms of segmenting the different subsectors within the Proptech field as we go along. But it was a great session, and yeah, thank you once again to our sponsors, to our audience. And we'll be continuing our sessions for May with next week's session, which is focused on the hotel and hospitality sector. We've got an excellent panel lined up of investors and operators. So please tune in for that, and that will take place next week, Thursday. Yeah, that will be it for us this week. So have a great week further, and we'll see you next week. Thank you once again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.